And hello to all of those who are joining us online. And we're going to get started here with our introduction to philosophy class. So we already did housekeeping and check your syllabus for that. And we're going to start off with what is philosophy. And actually, I'm going to just go ahead and pose that question to you guys. What from your reading, from your experience, maybe you guys have read other things in philosophy. Maybe you haven't, but it doesn't really matter. At this point, let's just talk about what is philosophy. What do you guys think it is? Next, so in your reading, the very first page, philosophy is an activity, is a way of thinking about certain sorts of questions. That's definitely one way to think about it. It is a kind of way of using logic. So this wasn't brought up here, but it's definitely something that we need to also be thinking about. It's in the Charles Sanders Peirce paper on how to make our ideas clear. Logic and arguments from reason. So these are really important kind of, especially in modern analytic philosophy. So not all philosophy follows the tradition that's happened in the last maybe 150 years. But it's really important that you have, in science, you need evidence. In philosophy, you need to make sure your arguments have some sort of reasons. You can't just make a statement without having something that will back it up in terms of like it sounding plausible or reasonable, okay? And it needs to be logical, so it needs to be able to fit together. It can't just jump from one thing to another. And so that's, yeah, so that I can move on. So I think we kind of already covered this in some sense. It started to. What are some of the questions that philosophy addresses? I thought this was good by Warburton. We all go throughout the day just living our lives, and I think, especially for like the majors that a lot of you guys are in with business and accounting and computers, data science, whatever you're doing, you can go throughout your day and just be like, okay, well, I have to get this thing done, and then after I get this thing done, I need to go and try to get a job. I was listening to the radio one of the days because the Gaokao just ended, and I was listening to how the speaker was saying something like, in Chinese they were like, 我们都在想这个我们高考完了，就没事了，就可以，但是高考完了又要去那个上大学，大学毕业了以后要找工作，或者去那个要做那个研究生对，然后那个找工作了以后还有那个要找妻子啊，找妻子或者找你的那个你要结婚，结婚以后要生孩子，生孩子以后要养孩子，要让他们以后他们要那个做那个高考，然后他也要帮他们找工作，所以你是一直在做一些事情。And if you're always just trying to do the next thing and the next thing, you just eventually you can kind of just take things for granted, right? What that means is that you're not really thinking about like why things are, or why do I have to do this, or why is it this way. You're just doing it, right? You're just kind of living. And so, and that's to a certain degree, we all need to do that because you just can't function if you're constantly thinking philosophically, unless you're paid to do that, maybe, But even in that case, you kind of have to just like, okay, I'm going to assume that this morning my bicycle is going to work, and I'm going to be able to. The gravity is still in effect. I'm not going to just float off. So all these things we take for granted every day. But we can stop for a moment with philosophy and ask very basic questions and think about them again. And so that's kind of the power of philosophy. So I put some of the questions: the meaning of life, religion. So these are all things that we will kind of touch on in the class. Actually, they're not exactly, but we will have some discussion about meaning of life, religion, right and wrong. So that we call it the study of right and wrong is called ethics. So we'll talk a little bit about ethics, politics, the nature of reality, and the nature of the mind. And I'll make these slides available, so if you didn't have enough time to write stuff down or whatever, don't worry about it, you'll get it later. The study of philosophy not only helps us think clearly about our prejudices, but also helps us to clarify precisely what we believe. In the process, it develops an ability to argue coherently on a wide range of issues, and which is a successful and transferable skill. So again, even though you maybe don't have to question your assumptions in your majors and in your field that you'll be going into and in life, you will become a better person I think, if you're able to talk about these things, if you're able to think this way. You'll be more interesting, for one, with your friends, probably. But also, you'll be able to understand other people's perspectives. So you're going to encounter throughout life, you already have encountered people that have very different views than you. And sometimes it's good to get inside their head. It doesn't mean you have to accept their beliefs, but you have to understand why would somebody think this way? And what would be the reasons that they would come to those conclusions? And it also might challenge your own beliefs, and you might even change some of your beliefs just by questioning these things. And that can be good as well, potentially. So we won't be going over the history of philosophy. We just don't have time for that in such a short course. But let me just say for a few minutes, just some of the stages that I see in the history of philosophy. You have, and this is very simplified, so don't take this as being like the most comprehensive and the best way of dividing it up. But at the top here, you have classical Greek period, which is like 2,500 years ago. Very similar time period to Kongzi and Lao Tzu, like about 500 BC in that kind of general time period, which is kind of interesting. So starting with Socrates, who was in the 5th century BC, and then he had a student Plato, and his student Plato had a student Aristotle. And do you guys know who Aristotle's student was? Anyone know? He had a very, very, who was that, Aaron? Yeah, go ahead.
Plato?
No, Plato was Aristotle's teacher. So Aristotle had a very famous student, but he wasn't so much a philosopher. He was a conqueror of most of the known world at that time, except for China. Pardon me?
The Romans was, I don't know how the English call it.
He was actually Macedonian Greek. His name is Alexander the Great. So I'm sure you guys have heard of him. And so Alexander the Great, he was Aristotle's student, and then he went on to be a warrior and a conqueror at a very young age. Actually, he died at about 33 years old. So you have also this classical Chinese stream. So, of course, there's many philosophers we could talk about from China. A very different way of argument and discussion, but very interesting and very valid and very... I love Chinese philosophy, actually, but we won't be talking much about Chinese philosophy because this is trying to give you more of like a Western philosophical perspective. So you have Confucius, Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi are some of them. Medieval Christian, Thomas Aquinas, Duns Scotus, Occam. I don't know if you guys know Occam's razor, if that's a concept you're familiar with. That the simplest explanation is usually the best. So medieval is the period between about like the fall of Rome, which was about the 500 AD, into about 1500 before the Renaissance. Then you have the Renaissance, and then after the Renaissance, you have people that are considered part of the Enlightenment, which include Voltaire, Rousseau, Leibniz, Spinoza, and Descartes. And then you have this German Romantic kind of period in the 19th century, Kant, Hegel, Heidegger, and pragmatism. This school here we'll be talking about at some length at the end of the course. It's the only American school of philosophy that really is homegrown in America. So this is an interesting one. If you want to know America, I think this is a very, very important kind of, it shaped America. It shaped a lot of the world. The concepts that came out of pragmatism, and that includes Peirce, James, and Dewey. And then existentialist is 19th and 20th century. Some of them are Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Sartre, and Camus. But we won't have time to study really the history in depth because we want to look at topics, which I think will be more interesting for you. So why study philosophy? Lydia, why would you want to study philosophy? Why did you come to this class? Understanding others and getting deeper, having deeper understanding of certain questions, right? Yeah. So this is something that Aristotle said. This is a paraphrase. I remember my philosophy of language teacher used this, and he would quote it in the Greek, and I can't do that for you, I'm sorry, but this is kind of a paraphrase from the Encyclopedia Britannica. So Aristotle, part of his story was that he wrote many books, but when he was really young, he actually started with philosophy. So he was like when he was a teenager, and he wrote this Protrepticus, and the Protrepticus was like why we should study certain things. Basically, that's what he started with. Why we should study certain things. And, for example, why should we study philosophy? And he said basically this: everyone must do philosophy because even arguing against the practice of philosophy is a form of philosophizing, right? So this is an interesting concept. Like, okay, so maybe we don't need philosophy. Let's just assume that we don't need philosophy. So, but by saying that, if I say we don't need philosophy, I've just made a philosophical statement, right? So I have to justify, in a sense, I have to justify why I'm saying we don't need philosophy, right? At least other people aren't necessarily going to be satisfied with me just saying that. Just like maybe you won't be satisfied with me saying like, tomorrow there will be no NBA finals. If I just said that, I'm just going to say that. Like, I make that decision. There's no need for NBA finals tomorrow. Well, I need to have a justification for that. Like, I can say that all I want, but if you are somebody who wants to take me seriously, now maybe you think I'm just crazy and you can just walk away, but if you want to actually take me seriously, you'd want to know why that is. So that's actually starting the questions, which are starting is actually a kind of philosophy. So, by the way, I think the Nuggets are going to take it, unfortunately, for the Heat. So why do we study philosophy? I think we talked about, Romes pointed this out, understanding others and a deeper understanding of ourselves. In Sun Tzu, who was actually a philosopher, Sun Tzu Bingfa, right? He said, 自己自彼, 百战不败, right? You have to know yourself and you have to understand others if you're going to win anything, if you're going to accomplish anything. That's kind of a paraphrase. Socrates, as we talked about earlier, he also said, know thyself. That's his famous it's very simple. But if you know yourself, it's probably the first step to understanding anything. If you're going to even ask questions about God, who is God, we probably still need to know who we are, almost, before we can start understanding who God is. So the understanding of others, understanding ourselves, and this is called the examined life. The examined life, where you're not just like going through life, as I said earlier, and just making assumptions, but you're actually examining things. And I think this leads to a richer life, learning to think. Actually, you guys, I think, as a result of taking this course, will be better students. I hope it will actually help you, not just like, okay, we'll get through this class, get the credits, but I actually really, really want to help you guys any way that I can to be able to be better at what you do. And I think philosophy could help you with that, just to be able to see things, make some questions, have a little bit more skepticism about what people just say, don't just take it for granted, and try to get to the deeper level. And then it's actually fun. I think it's a good point. Warburton brings this out in this book. It's actually a valid reason. It's actually very interesting and fun to actually ask philosophical questions. Okay, there is this. You can read this online if you want to. There's a whole spiel from one professor at a university on the usefulness of philosophy, and you can look at that at your own leisure. It's not a required thing though. Okay, can philosophy answer all our questions? Yeah. So there's different fields of inquiry are going to lead to different, answers, and I think that's important to recognize. I mean, I guess if you really want to go into a deep discussion of this, we'd have to do more than this, but it seems kind of ridiculous to ever think that any one thing is going to answer everything. I guess, I don't know, that's kind of my assumption. To lower the expectations for this course is that I'm not going to be able to, or neither is any of the authors that you will encounter in this course going to answer all the questions, even the questions that we bring up here. So all of the questions that you bring up here will not be answered. You will maybe you will have some answers, like you will be able to formulate some answers. I think I've formulated some answers. I'm actually not going to tell you my beliefs until the end of the course because I don't want to make you biased towards one way or another as much as possible, if that's possible. You might be able to guess at some point, but I think the main thing is that I want you to really try to grapple with the differences in the questions, to really understand why does somebody think there is a God and why does somebody think there isn't a God, and how can they both be rational beings and come to those conclusions? How do they come to those conclusions? To me, that's more important than convincing you of the answers that I've come to. Okay, so to be able to think on your own and answer these questions, of course, we can't answer all of them, but if you can actually know how to do that, if you had enough time, so for example, if you had an infinite amount of time and you had infinite amount of power, then you probably could come to the answer for all of these questions if you know how to think it through. So that's the thing. Of course, you don't and you never will, but at least you will have the tools for that just in case science figures that out for us. Kind of joking.